Hello everyone. Naruto Fix here, back with another amazing What If Naruto fanfic. Which is, what if Naruto was sent to handle threats that could never be revealed? Part 1. If you enjoy Naruto stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the journey grow. Now let's head right into today's fanfic. There were missions that never reached the board. No scrolls. No team assignments. No after-action reports. They existed in the narrow space between acknowledged danger and convenient ignorance. Threats so destabilizing that revealing their existence would cause more harm than the damage they might inflict if left unchecked. Naruto Uzumaki learned about those missions on a night when the Hokage's office lights stayed on long after the village slept. The summons came without ceremony. No guards escorted him. No formal tone was used. Just a single sentence spoken quietly across a desk heavy with history. There are problems, the Hokage said, eyes tired, voice measured, that cannot be solved publicly. Quote, Naruto didn't ask why. He asked, how bad? The Hokage didn't answer immediately. Instead, they slid a thin folder across the desk. No markings. No seal. Just paper. Naruto opened it, and felt the temperature of the room change. The threats inside weren't armies or rogue ninja. They were concepts. An ideology that spread faster than chakra. A sealed experiment that adapted by being observed. A border phenomenon that erased villages from memory rather than destroying them. Each one shared the same conclusion at the bottom of the page. Public disclosure unacceptable. Naruto looked up slowly. So if people find out, they panic, the Hokage finished. Or worse, they try to interfere. Quote, Naruto closed the folder. And you want me, he said quietly, because I can end things without leaving stories behind. The Hokage met his gaze. Yes. Naruto accepted without hesitation. Not because he agreed easily, but because he understood something most people never did. Some dangers didn't want victory. They wanted attention. The first mission took him far from Konoha, into territory that did not appear on current maps. The land looked ordinary, fields, ruins, scattered settlements. But Naruto felt the distortion immediately. People lived there, but no one remembered why. Villages had names that changed every generation. Records contradicted themselves. Graves outnumbered birth registries. Something was feeding on awareness. Kurama stirred uneasily. That thing doesn't kill, the fox said. It erases relevance. Naruto nodded. Then fighting it openly would only make it stronger. He didn't confront it directly. Naruto spent days walking through the region, subtly adjusting chakra flow, anchoring memory to physical CTS, reinforcing mundane details, names, routines, stories tied to place rather than event. He wasn't destroying the threat. He was starving it. When it finally withdrew, there was no explosion. No collapse. Just a quiet stabilization. People remembered where they lived again. No one knew why it had almost been lost. Naruto left before gratitude could form. The second mission was worse. A group of shinobi had uncovered a technique that allowed brief rewrites of causality, small changes, minor corrections. But each use created unseen fractures that accumulated silently. Left unchecked, the world itself would have started correcting them. The Hokage's instructions were simple. Make it stop. No survivors who understand what they were doing. Quote, Naruto stood outside the hideout for a long time before entering. This wasn't a battle. This was containment through finality. He moved efficiently. No speeches. No warnings. When it was over, Naruto destroyed every trace of the technique, every note, every reference, even from his own memory, sealing the details away so deeply that not even Kurama could access them. Kurama noticed. You locked that away from yourself. Naruto replied quietly, I don't get to be curious. The missions continued. Threats that couldn't be named. Enemies that couldn't be captured. Phenomena that couldn't be studied without becoming dangerous. Naruto became the solution precisely because he left nothing behind. No questions. No proof. No myths. Only absence. Over time, Naruto noticed the change in how these missions were given. They stopped being explained. Coordinates arrived. Windows of time were specified. Silence followed. Trust, absolute and terrifying, had been placed in his hands. Naruto felt the weight of it settle deeper with every mission. One night, after returning from a particularly grim assignment, Naruto stood alone on a rooftop, staring at the village lights. Kurama spoke softly. "You're becoming the village's immune system." Naruto nodded. "Immune systems don't get thanked." "No." Kurama agreed. "They just get blamed when they fail." Naruto exhaled slowly. Failure was not an option. Because failure, in this role, didn't mean defeat. It meant revelation. Naruto understood now why these threats could never be revealed. The moment people knew about them, the damage would already be done. Fear would spread faster than danger. Panic would cause more destruction than the threat ever could. So Naruto carried the truth alone. And the world remained stable. As dawn approached, Naruto turned away from the rooftops and vanished into the quiet paths only he walked. There were more missions waiting. More threats that could never be named. And Naruto Uzumaki would face them all. So that the world could keep pretending they never existed. Naruto began to understand the pattern. The threats he was sent to handle did not exist in isolation. They formed a hidden ecology. Phenomena, ideas, experiments, and entities that fed on the same weakness in the world, the human need to know. The more something was observed, discussed, categorized, or feared, the more real and dangerous it became. Silence was not neglect. Silence was containment. The next assignment arrived without coordinates. That alone was alarming. Naruto received only a window of time and a single instruction etched into a thin strip of sealing paper. If you sense resistance, do not engage directly. Naruto stared at the message for a long moment before burning it to ash. Kurama's voice was cautious. "That's not a location-based threat." Naruto nodded. "It's attached to people." He found it in a trading hub far from the great villages, a place that thrived on constant movement. Merchants came and went. Stories were exchanged as freely as currency. Rumors were the lifeblood of the region. And something was riding those rumors. Naruto felt it immediately. A subtle distortion that sharpened whenever people repeated the same story, each retelling adding weight, detail, and emote. Ion. It was not a creature. Not a technique. It was a feedback loop. An idea that gained physical consequence through repetition. Naruto listened. He spent days blending in, letting the story wash over him. At first it was just bad luck, someone said. Then people started disappearing. They say if you talk about it too much, it notices you. Each version added structure. Each retelling gave it shape. Kurama growled. "It's becoming coherent." Naruto exhaled slowly. Then fighting it would make it permanent. Naruto did the opposite of what instinct demanded. He didn't suppress the story. He diluted it. He introduced contradictions. Small, harmless ones. He spread alternative explanations that felt more mundane, more boring. He encouraged forgettable details, encouraged people to lose interest. He didn't erase the idea. He made it uncompelling. Within days, the phenomenon weakened. Within a week, it dissolved entirely, unable to sustain itself without focused belief. No one noticed when it vanished. They simply stopped talking about it. Naruto left without looking back. This was how most of these missions ended. Not with a decisive blow, but with the quiet disappearance of something that had almost mattered too much. As the assignments continued, Naruto noticed another change. The threats were getting subtler. Not stronger, but smarter. They no longer lashed out immediately. They embedded themselves deeper into systems, trade networks, religious interpretations, academic theory, even art. Places where attention was constant but diffused. Kurama observed it too. They're adapting to silence, the fox said. Naruto nodded grimly. Then silence alone won't be enough. The most dangerous mission of Part 1 came without warning. Naruto was sent to intercept a delegation of scholars before they crossed into Fire Country. Officially, they were historians. Unofficially, they specialized in reconstructing events erased from record. Not exposing them, rebuilding them. Naruto understood the implication immediately. If they succeeded, it wouldn't matter how quiet the threats were. Someone would connect the dots. Naruto intercepted them at dusk, on a forest road where nothing dramatic could happen without witnesses. He revealed himself openly. No masks, no intimidation. Just presence. You should turn back, Naruto said calmly. The lead scholar studied him carefully. You're not border patrol. No, Naruto replied. I'm the reason some borders exist. Silence followed. Then the scholar smiled faintly. That's an interesting way to avoid a question. Naruto met the gaze. This is the only warning you get. They didn't turn back. They didn't attack either. They simply continued walking, convinced that truth, once assembled, would justify itself. Naruto let them pass. Then he followed. What Naruto did next would never be written down. He didn't kill them. He didn't threaten them. He didn't erase their memories. He redirected their certainty. Naruto exposed them to fragments. Carefully chosen, incomplete, contradictory pieces of truth that could never fully align. Enough to undermine their confidence. Enough to ensure that any reconstruction they attempted would collapse under its own weight. By the time they left Fire Country weeks later, their research was intact. Their conclusions were not. They would spend the rest of their lives questioning themselves instead of the world. Kurama was quiet for a long time afterward. That was cruel, the fox finally said. Naruto didn't deny it. It was necessary. Yes, Kurama replied. But it cost you something. Naruto looked out at the horizon. I know. Naruto began to feel it then. The cumulative weight of missions that could never be acknowledged. Each success erased a possibility. Each intervention narrowed the future just enough to keep it from breaking. He was no longer just removing threats. He was editing reality at its most fragile points. That knowledge did not empower him. It isolated him. One night, Naruto stood alone beneath an open sky far from any village, stars bright and indifferent above him. How many of these are there? He asked quietly. Kurama answered honestly. As many as a thinking world creates. Naruto closed his eyes. Then he opened them again. Then I'll keep going. Time was the one thing silence could not erase. Naruto understood that now. Threats that fed on attention could be starved. Ideas that grew through fear could be diluted. Even knowledge itself could be bent, redirected, fractured until it collapsed under its own contradictions. But time preserved echoes. It layered cause upon cause until patterns emerged no matter how carefully they had been obscured. The next assignment came with no warning and no instructions. That alone told Naruto everything. He felt it first as a pressure in his chest, subtle but relentless, like standing near a storm that hadn't yet broken. The sensation did not belong to any one place. It followed him across borders, across days, across sleep. Kurama's voice was low and uneasy. This one isn't new. Naruto slowed his steps. How old? Older than the shinobi system, Kurama replied. Older than villages. Naruto exhaled. Ancient threats didn't adapt to silence. They waited. The phenomenon revealed itself gradually, through inconsistencies Naruto could no longer ignore. Settlements that rebuilt themselves in identical patterns centuries apart. Conflicts that repeated with different names but the same outcomes. Leaders who made the same catastrophic choices as their predecessors, despite having no recorded reason to do so. History wasn't looping. It was remembering. Not consciously, not intentionally, but inevitably. Naruto followed the trail across nations, across ruins buried so deep that even the names had eroded. Everywhere he went, the same quiet truth surfaced. Something had been allowed to continue not because it was safe, but because it had been managed. Each generation had contained it just well enough to pass the responsibility forward. Until now, he found the center of it in a place no one lived anymore. An empty city. Not destroyed, not abandoned in panic, just set aside, as if the world had agreed, silently, to walk around it forever. Naruto stood at its edge as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across streets that had once known life. Kurama spoke softly. This is where the first compromise was made. Naruto stepped forward. The threat was not waiting for him. It was already active. The city itself responded as Naruto entered, architecture aligning subtly, pathways guiding him inward. Not hostile, not defensive, recognizing. Naruto understood with chilling clarity. This was not an enemy. It was a failsafe, a mechanism embedded into reality long ago, designed to reset the world if certain conditions were met. War without end, power without restraint, knowledge without wisdom. It was not meant to be stopped. It was meant to be used. Naruto felt the truth settle heavily inside him. This threat could never be revealed because revelation was its trigger. The more people knew it existed, the closer the world came to meeting the conditions that would activate it. Every generation had chosen silence. And every generation had pushed the burden forward. Until it reached someone who could no longer pass it on. Kurama's voice was grave. If this activates, it won't destroy the world. Naruto nodded. It'll rewrite it. Yes. Naruto clenched his fists. So the choice is the same as always, he murmured. Do nothing and let time finish the job, or intervene and become part of the system. Quote. Kurama was silent. Naruto walked into the heart of the empty city and placed his hand against a structure older than recorded history. The reaction was immediate. Information, not memories, not images, but understanding, flowed into him. He saw every near activation, every crisis narrowly diverted, every time silence had saved the world at the cost of honesty. And he saw the future. The moment when silence would no longer be enough. Naruto pulled his hand away, breathing hard. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't destroy the failsafe. He couldn't expose it. He couldn't let it activate. So he did the only thing left. He anchored it. Naruto bound the mechanism to himself. Not with seals, not with chakra alone, but with intent. He made his continued existence a condition. As long as he lived, as long as he chose restraint, the failsafe would remain dormant. Not gone. Watching. Waiting. Naruto became its counterweight. When he left the city, it settled back into stillness, indistinguishable from ruin once more. The world continued on, unaware of how close it had come to starting over. Naruto did not return to Konoha immediately. He needed time, not to rest, but to understand what he had accepted. Kurama finally spoke. You've tied the fate of the world to yourself. Naruto looked out at the horizon. No, he said quietly. I tied it to my choices. Naruto returned to the world slowly. Not to Konoha at first, but to motion, to walking roads, feeling wind against his skin, letting ordinary exhaustion remind him he was still human. After binding the ancient failsafe to himself, everything felt slightly different, as if reality now paid closer attention to his decisions. Not obedience. Awareness. Time, he realized, had started watching him. The first sign came as déjà vu. Naruto passed through a small border town and felt an almost painful familiarity, like he had already lived this moment. The angle of the sun. The sound of a merchant arguing over price. A child tripping and laughing instead of crying. None of it was wrong. That was the problem. Kurama sensed it too. The mechanism you anchored to yourself, the fox said carefully, it's synchronizing with you. Quote. Naruto frowned. Meaning, it's no longer just waiting for conditions, Kurama replied. It's learning how you prevent them. Naruto's jaw tightened. So even this wasn't static. Naruto began to notice patterns tightening around him. Events no longer escalated easily in his presence. Arguments de-escalated unnaturally fast. Battles ended just short of catastrophe. Even coincidences leaned toward restraint instead of chaos. To the world, it would look like luck. To Naruto, it felt like pressure. The failsafe was adapting, adjusting reality around him so that it never had to activate. Naruto was no longer just intervening. He was becoming a variable the world compensated for. That frightened him more than any enemy ever had. Because if the world learned to rely on his presence, then his absence would be catastrophic. Naruto made a decision. He would test the system. Not recklessly. Carefully. He withdrew. Not from responsibility, but from proximity. Naruto avoided centers of conflict. He let small crises unfold without his influence. He watched from afar, measuring how the world behaved when he wasn't nearby to unconsciously stabilize it. The results were mixed. Some situations resolved naturally. Others spiraled faster than they should have. Kurama spoke grimly. It's already factoring you in. Even when you're not there. Naruto closed his eyes. So the world has started assuming I'll step in. Yes. Naruto felt a chill settle deep in his chest. This was the same mistake villagers had always made with heroes. Only now, it was reality itself making that mistake. The final test of Part 1 came quietly. Naruto felt it before he saw it. A convergence of timelines, a tightening of probability. A conflict brewing between two minor nations that should have remained contained, but instead aligned too perfectly with past catastrophes. Not enough to activate the failsafe. Yet, but close enough that Naruto could feel it pulling at him, urging him to intervene early. Naruto stood at the crossroads, literally and figuratively. If he acted now, the conflict would dissolve before it mattered. If he didn't, it would escalate, but possibly still resolve without triggering the ancient mechanism. This was the hardest choice yet. Not action versus inaction, but trust versus control. Kurama waited. For once, the fox did not advise. Naruto took a slow breath and stepped back. He chose not to interfere. Days passed. The conflict flared. People were hurt. But then, unexpectedly, it stalled. Negotiations emerged. Third parties intervened. The situation stabilized without collapsing into disaster. Naruto watched from afar, heart heavy. The world could still correct itself. But it hurt more when it did. Naruto understood the final lesson of this chapter then. He was not meant to replace the world's ability to survive. He was meant to guard the edges, the moments when survival tipped into annihilation. Nothing more, nothing less. As Naruto finally turned back toward Konoha, he felt the ancient failsafe inside him settle. Not gone, not inert, but calmer. Less alert. Time was still watching him. But it was no longer leaning entirely on him. Kurama spoke softly. You chose restraint. Naruto nodded. I chose trust. And if that trust is broken. Naruto's gaze hardened. Then I'll be there. Naruto reached the village gates at dawn. The guards greeted him normally. No reverence. No suspicion. Perfect. As he stepped inside, Naruto felt the weight of Part 1 settle into something solid and survivable. He was not the answer to every hidden threat. He was the limit. The line no unrevealed danger was allowed to cross. Naruto did not tell anyone what he had bound to himself. Not the Hokage. Not his friends. Not even the village that trusted him with its safety without ever knowing why. Some truths, he had learned, did not become lighter when shared. They became unstable. And instability was exactly what his role existed to prevent. Life in Konoha resumed its familiar rhythm around him. Missions were assigned. Patrols rotated. Disputes were settled. The village felt peaceful. Earned peace, the kind that followed years of hardship. Naruto walked those streets knowing how fragile that peace truly was. Every laugh echoed against 1,000 silent disasters that never happened. Every ordinary day was a victory no one would ever celebrate. Naruto began receiving missions again. Not the kind written on scrolls. The kind delivered through implication. A pause in a meeting. A look held a second too long. A quiet request framed as coincidence. He understood them instantly. Something unnameable had shifted somewhere. One such mission led him deep into a mountain range far from any border. The land there was dead in a way that didn't show on maps. Plants grew, animals lived, but nothing thrived. The air carried a dullness, as if sound itself hesitated to linger. Kurama stirred uneasily. This place has been corrected before. Naruto nodded. More than once. That alone told him the danger. Repeated corrections meant a failure to resolve the underlying problem. At the heart of the mountains lay a cavern sealed not by jutsu, but by agreement. Naruto felt it as he approached. A boundary shaped by intent rather than power. Generations ago, shinobi had chosen not to explore this place further, not because it was impossible, but because doing so had consequences. They could not afford. Someone had crossed that line recently. Not maliciously. Ignorantly. Naruto entered the cavern alone. The air inside was still, heavy with unrealized potential. At the center stood a fractured crystal formation, humming faintly, not with chakra, but with possibility. It was a nexus point, a convergence where alternate outcomes brushed too closely against the present. A mistake, a curiosity, a place where what might have been bled into what is. If exposed, it would not destroy the world. It would destabilize choice itself. Naruto knelt, studying the fractures. He could feel timelines pulling, subtle, seductive. The promise of undoing regrets. Of choosing better paths. Of fixing mistakes that had defined entire lives. Kurama growled sharply. Don't listen. Naruto closed his eyes. I'm not. Because he knew better. The world could not function if every regret demanded correction. Meaning required consequence. Naruto sealed the cavern. Not permanently, but ethically. He reinforced the old agreement, embedding it into the land itself. The crystal's hum softened, potential collapsing back into silence. When he left, the mountains felt lighter. But Naruto felt heavier. Because every unrevealed threat carried the same temptation. The temptation to improve the world by force. Naruto returned to Konoha with a clearer understanding of his role. He was not just removing dangers. He was protecting choice. Protecting the world's right to be imperfect, painful, unresolved. Because a world without consequences was not peace. It was stagnation. The ancient failsafe within him responded differently now. Not pulling. Not watching. But listening. As if measuring whether Naruto still understood why it existed at all. Naruto stood on the Hokage monument one evening, wind tugging at his cloak, the village spread out below him. I won't fix everything, he said quietly. I promise. The weight inside him eased. Just slightly. Naruto finally understood the boundary he had been searching for. He would intervene only when a threat erased choice entirely. A truth could not exist without destroying the present. Silence was the lesser harm. Everything else, he would let the world face on its own. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. This was the final shaping of Part 1. Naruto Uzumaki was no longer just a shinobi sent to handle unrevealable threats. He was the arbiter of last resort. The one who decided when the world must be allowed to struggle, and when it must be saved from itself. And that line was now clear. Naruto had crossed the point where turning back was even a concept. That realization didn't come during a battle, or while sealing another unrevealable threat. It came on an ordinary evening, while he stood at Ichiraku Ramen, listening to the clatter of bowls and the sea laughter around him. Everything here was simple. Too simple. Naruto watched the steam rise from the broth and felt the ancient failsafe inside him respond faintly. Not in warning, not in urgency, but in recognition. As if it understood something the world did not. Normal life only existed because someone decided where abnormality ended. And that someone was him. The next unrevealable threat did not originate from the outside world. It came from Konoha itself. Naruto felt it as a subtle resistance in the village's barrier. Nothing that triggered alarms, nothing any sensor team would notice. But to Naruto, it felt like friction, as if two versions of reality were rubbing against each other. Kurama's voice was immediate and sharp. That's not an attack. Naruto set his bowl down slowly. No, that's a correction trying to happen inside the village. Naruto stood. The source was a sealed underground chamber that had not been accessed in decades. Officially, it was empty, its contents classified, then quietly written out of relevance. In truth, it housed a contingency that had never been meant to be activated within the village's lifetime. A failsafe to the failsafe. Naruto stood before the entrance, feeling the pull intensify. Kurama growled. This one exists because someone didn't trust the original solution. Naruto nodded grimly. They never do. Inside, the chamber was pristine. Too pristine. No dust. No decay. No signs of time passing normally. At the center hovered a structure of layered seals and probability anchors, designed not to destroy threats, but to overwrite outcomes within a controlled area. A last resort. One that assumed someone like Naruto would eventually fail. Naruto felt the weight of that assumption settle into his chest. He approached slowly, reading the design not with his eyes, but with understanding. This mechanism wasn't malicious. It was built by people who believed they were protecting the future by ensuring it could always be corrected. They hadn't trusted restraint. They had trusted control. Naruto closed his eyes. This was exactly the kind of thing that could never be revealed. If the village knew such a device existed, every loss would become negotiable. Every tragedy would invite demands for reversal. Choice would erode under the promise of correction. And the ancient failsafe bound to Naruto would not tolerate that. Kurama's voice was dark. These two systems will clash eventually. Naruto exhaled. Then it ends here. Destroying the chamber outright would have consequences. The energy stored within it was immense, shaped by decades of contingency planning. Releasing it violently could destabilize the village itself. Naruto chose a quieter solution. He unwrote it. Not physically. Conceptually. Naruto disentangled the anchors, severed the assumptions that fed the mechanism, and collapsed its logic inward. The structure didn't explode. It simply stopped making sense to exist. The seals faded. The chamber became empty. The village never noticed. Naruto leaned against the wall, breath steady but heavy. Kurama spoke quietly. You just removed the village's last illusion of control. Naruto nodded. Good. When Naruto emerged into the night air, the ancient failsafe inside him shifted again, not tightening, not warning. Approving. For the first time, Naruto felt certain that what he carried did not seek domination or reset. It sought limits. And Naruto had just reaffirmed them. Days passed. Then weeks. The unrevealable threats slowed. Not because they vanished, but because fewer crossed the final line. The world adjusted, subtly, learning what could exist and what could not. Naruto watched it happen with mixed relief and exhaustion. Because each adjustment made his presence more essential. And more isolating. Naruto realized then the true cost of Part 1. Not the danger. Not the secrecy. Not even the moral weight. but the knowledge that no one could ever replace him. Not yet. And maybe not ever. One night, Naruto stood alone beyond the village walls, staring up at the stars. How long can this last? He asked quietly. Kurama answered honestly. As long as you remember why you chose restraint over dominance. Naruto closed his eyes. Then I'll remember. Naruto Uzumaki had become something the world would never name. Not a hero. Not a god. Not a shadow ruler. But a boundary. A living line between what the world could survive knowing, and what it could not. And as long as he stood, the unrevealable would remain unseen. Naruto felt the world settle after the chamber was unwritten, like a deep breath finally released. The village did not celebrate. No report was filed. No ripple reached the surface. Yet beneath the calm, something fundamental had shifted. Konoha no longer possessed the illusion that every loss could be corrected, that every mistake could be overwritten. The village would endure, not because it could redo the past, but because it would learn to live with it. That understanding sharpened Naruto's vigilance. The unrevealable threats did not stop. They changed their approach. Where once they pressed against the edges of reality with force or hunger, now they tested process. They crept into governance, into logistics, into assumptions so mundane that no one questioned them. Naruto sensed these movements as slight misalignments. Supply routes that encouraged dependency, training doctrines that subtly narrowed options, diplomatic language that erased accountability without anyone noticing. Each time, Naruto intervened just enough to restore choice. Never more. He learned to operate with a surgeon's patience. A sentence rephrased. A meeting delayed. A protocol amended by a single clause. The village continued forward, unaware that its trajectory had been nudged away from a cliff it would never see. Kurama watched with a wary respect. You're no longer reacting to danger, the fox said. You're pruning futures. Quote. Naruto didn't deny it. Only the ones that remove alternatives. That distinction mattered to him. It was the line he refused to cross. One evening, a message arrived without sender or seal. Just a place and a time. Naruto recognized the signature of absence that accompanied it. Someone else was doing work like his. Or trying to. He went alone. The meeting place was a half-collapsed observatory on a ridge overlooking a dead valley. The sky above it felt thin, as if the stars themselves were hesitant to look down. Naruto arrived early and waited, breathing slowly, keeping his presence neutral. When the other figure stepped out of the shadows, Naruto felt the difference immediately. Not power. Precision. A mind trained to minimize footprints, to leave no residue behind. They spoke first. You've been closing doors I was mapping. Naruto met the gaze. Then your maps were leading somewhere they shouldn't. Quote. A pause. The wind carried dust through broken stone. We do similar work, the figure said. But you act alone. That's inefficient. Naruto shook his head. It's deliberate. They circled each other with words, not threats. The other had catalogued anomalies, traced disappearances, predicted where unrevealable dangers would surface next. They wanted coordination. A network. Redundancy. Naruto listened. And refused. A network creates attention, he said calmly. Attention creates gravity. Gravity collapses silence. The figure considered this. And when you fail, Naruto answered without hesitation, then the world will face something it was always going to face. Not everything can be postponed. The conversation ended there. The other left without hostility, without agreement. Naruto remained until the valley's pressure eased, then returned home. That night, Naruto slept poorly. Not from fear, but from the awareness that others were beginning to notice a pattern. Disasters that should have happened, but didn't. Threats that approached the threshold and quietly dissolved. Silence, repeated often enough, became conspicuous. Time pressed closer. Naruto adjusted his methods again. He allowed certain small failures to occur, contained, survivable ones. A reminder to the world that struggle still existed, that it did not live inside a cocoon of perfection. Pain taught limits. Limits preserved freedom. He hated that lesson. He accepted it anyway. Weeks later, the ancient failsafe stirred, not in alarm, but in inquiry. Naruto felt it ask, in its wordless way, whether he still understood the terms of the bond. He answered by standing down when restraint mattered more than intervention, and stepping in when a single choice would have erased many. The failsafe settled. Naruto stood on the edge of the village at dawn, watching the barrier hum softly as traders entered and guards yawned through shift change. The world looked ordinary. It always did when he succeeded. He understood now that Part 1 was never about defeating unrevealable threats. It was about learning when not to. Learning to trust time without surrendering to it. Learning to protect choice without controlling outcomes. Learning to accept that silence was a tool, not a refuge. Naruto turned back toward Konoha, steady and resolved. He would continue, not as a hero history could praise, not as a shadow the world could fear, but as the line that ensured unrevealable threats remained exactly that, unrevealed, unfed, and unfinished. Naruto stopped thinking in terms of missions. That was another quiet change he didn't notice at first. There were no longer clear beginnings or endings. No moment where a threat announced itself and waited to be handled. Instead, everything blended together into a continuous state of awareness, like standing in shallow water where the current never fully stopped moving. This was his life now. Not action. Vigilance. He could feel unrevealable threats before they formed. A shift in ideology discussed too passionately in a closed room. A research question that crossed from curiosity into inevitability. A new jutsu theory that solved a problem too cleanly, removing consequences instead of managing them. Naruto learned to recognize these moments by instinct rather than analysis. The ancient failsafe inside him would tighten slightly, not warning him of danger, but signaling direction. This way. Not yet. Too far. One such signal led him to a small research facility on the outskirts of Fire Country. Officially, it studied barrier resilience. Unofficially, it was pushing towards something far more dangerous, a method of isolating entire regions from causality itself. Not destroying them, not sealing them, exempting them. Naruto stood on a hill overlooking the compound, watching researchers move inside, unaware of what they were approaching. Kurama's voice was grim. If they finish that work, consequences stop applying. Naruto nodded slowly. And when consequences disappear, responsibility follows. Exactly the kind of threat that could never be revealed. Naruto didn't storm the facility. He didn't sabotage it outright. Instead, he introduced imperfection. A miscalculation here. A false positive there. An experiment that succeeded once but failed unpredictably afterward. The research lost reliability. Funding dwindled. Interest faded. Within months, the project was quietly shut down, recorded as theoretically interesting but impractical. The world remained intact. No one ever knew how close they came to exempting themselves from reality. Naruto felt the weight of each choice accumulate. Not as guilt, as gravity. Every unrevealable threat he handled pulled him further from the simple certainty he once lived by. Back then, right and wrong had been loud, visible, unavoidable. Now, morality lived in margins and probabilities. He had to decide what the world was allowed to try. That knowledge never stopped being terrifying. Naruto began avoiding mirrors. Not because he didn't recognize himself, but because he did. The man staring back was calmer, sharper, quieter. Less driven by emotion, more by evaluation. He still cared deeply, but he no longer allowed that care to dictate action. He had become dangerous in a way fists and jutsu never were. Kurama noticed. You're afraid of becoming something you can't undo. Naruto answered honestly. I'm afraid I already have. The next unrevealable threat tested that fear directly. It wasn't external. It wasn't conceptual. It was personal. Naruto sensed a convergence centered on someone close to him. Someone whose pain, if pushed just a little further, could become a catalyst. Not intentionally. Not maliciously. Just. Inevitably. If that pain crossed a certain threshold, it would resonate with patterns Naruto had already seen. Patterns that led to fractures, to movements, to tragedies history never recorded properly. Naruto stood at a distance, watching this person live their life, struggle quietly, hold things in that shoal. Never be carried alone. For the first time since taking this role, Naruto hesitated. This threat couldn't be diluted, couldn't be starved, couldn't be redirected abstractly. It required intervention as a person, not as a boundary. Kurama spoke carefully. This one doesn't disappear if you stay silent. Naruto clenched his fists. So if I step in, he said, I change their life. Yes. And if I don't? Kurama didn't answer. Because Naruto already knew. Naruto made the hardest choice he had faced so far. He stepped forward, not as a guardian of unrevealable threats, not as an unseen stabilizer, but as Naruto Uzumaki. He listened. He spoke. He offered support without explanation, without solutions, without shaping outcomes. He did not erase pain. He did not control the future. He simply made sure that one life did not become the spark for something the world could not survive. When it was over, Naruto walked away shaking, not from fear, but from relief. He had not crossed the line. He had not become a manipulator of lives. He had remained human. That night, the ancient failsafe inside him responded differently. Not approving. Not warning. Acknowledging. Naruto lay awake under the stars, understanding something crucial. Unrevealable threats were not always monsters, ideologies, or systems. Sometimes, they were moments where pain went unseen long enough to reshape the world. And silence alone was not always the answer. Naruto understood now what Part 1 truly was. It was not the story of him becoming stronger. It was the story of him learning when not to use strength. When to intervene quietly. When to step back. When to act openly. And when to trust the world to survive without him. Naruto Uzumaki stood at the edge of the village as night settled in, the lights of Konoha glowing softly behind him. Nothing felt wrong. And that was the proof. The unrevealable threats he had faced, ideas that fed on attention, systems that erased consequence, failures waiting to be corrected into disasters, had all been handled without leaving scars the world could see. No legends were born. No warnings were issued. No truths were spoken aloud. The world continued forward, ignorant of how close it had come to tearing itself apart. Naruto understood now that his role was not to fix the world. It was to make sure the world remained free to make its own mistakes. He would intervene only when choice itself was threatened. Only when silence was the lesser harm. Only when revelation would do more damage than any enemy ever could. That boundary was his burden. And his promise. He had learned to walk the narrowest line of all. Between action and restraint. Between secrecy and compassion. Between being present and becoming indispensable. He refused to let the world rely on him blindly. And he refused to abandon it when it truly needed him. Naruto turned back toward the village, his steps steady, his resolve quiet. No one would ever know what he had stopped. No one would ever thank him for what he had prevented. And that was exactly how it had to be. Thank you.